Hello and welcome to the biggest Faces of the Men's Rights Movement video I have ever done. We are with the absolute legend, Erin Pizzey. Um, Erin, it's an absolute honor to have you on my channel. You have been a hero for male victims of domestic violence for many, many decades, and you just were awarded a CBE. Is that correct?
That's right. Yes, as a commander of the British Empire, I was really, really shocked because in my history, I've had terrible fights with the judiciary, with almost everybody, and so I was very surprised. I think everybody else was as well.
I was surprised too, not because you don't deserve it, but just because of the politics in the UK. And you're
Yes.
right, your history and the way you've been slandered in the past. But it's amazing. It's a very good sign if you think about it.
Well, it is, and particularly Camilla, the Queen here in England, is, and she sent me a card to congratulate me. By the way, she is particularly interested in domestic violence. And what I'm interested in is that her acknowledgement of me means that she understands that I also say that women can be equally violent as men. And that has, of course, been the great argument and the contention, because you have the feminist movement who actually make these billions of dollars claiming that they're only all women are victims of male brutality. And that's the fight. And
Aaron,
I've always said, yes,
uh, that's you just said something huge. Camilla sent you a card congratulating you,
yeah,
and she is particularly interested in domestic violence.
yes,
And she knows your work and she knows that your work has
yes.
been, wow, that is incredible.
It's
That is
very
incredible.
important.
Yeah.
It's also very important because it has been such a long, lonely, hard road to be saying loudly at a time when all men were condemned, and men as fathers were condemned, and we even had one of our members of Parliament, Harriet Harman, saying things like men are not necessarily harmonious to family life, and
Uh,
all those statements, which basically we've had about 50 years, as far as I'm concerned, of the really the condemnation of men and boys.
Harriet Harman, I mean, her and Jess Phillips a few years ago
She's
mocking,
another one, yeah,
she's
yeah.
another one mocking me about games. I actually had lunch with Phil Davies at the Cinnamon Club, and he was the
Mm.
one back in 2020 essentially single-handedly defeated the effort. Feminists were trying to augment the domestic abuse bill to exclude male victims. And they were angry because when it was first written, the domestic abuse bill, it was written in a gender neutral way. And
Mm.
feminist organizations protested and they were upset that it was gender neutral. And it's not, people wonder, why do men's advocates spend so much time attacking feminist organizations? And they think it's because, oh, we must be misogynistic if we're against feminism. We're not against the principles of feminism. It's what feminist organizations do. And
And have always done. It was never a women's movement. You have to remember the history of it. It was Marxist feminists in 1969, and that was the time. And I'm particularly exercised by this because my parents were captured in Tin Sin in 1949 and held under house arrest for 3 years. We didn't know
really,
if they were alive or dead. And so I have no love of communism. And so when I first got involved with the women's movement, and I went to my first meeting, we were all told we had to go to local meetings. And we were given the address. And I walked up this hall, and there were all these Mao posters. So I was not predisposed to be very, I walked into this room, and she said to me, "Why are you here?" And I said, "Because I have children and I'm lonely and isolated at home, and I'd like to meet other women and children." She said, "But that's not your problem. Your problem is your husband oppresses you." And I looked at her and I said, "But how am I oppressed? I have a choice. I can stay home with my children, or I could go to work. So where's the oppression?" And that's when I realized the whole thing was a setup. It was never a women's movement.
right. So you were very prominent in the refuge movement in the late 60s, early 70s.
I founded the refuge.
You
I
founded the
was the
refuge movement.
Yeah, and there was nothing. There was no refuges. I didn't intend to open a refuge. I opened a community center for mothers and children like myself because I was lonely. Are you there?
I'm there. Yeah, I can hear you.
I
My
can't
camera's
see
just,
you. That's all.
yeah, my camera's just being a bit funny.
Okay, don't worry. Let's worry about it. I'll
But
just go
I
on.
you're the star
Stop me if
here.
you. Yeah, you can stop me if you want me to stop.
No, 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 carry on. You're the star of this video. No one cares about me.
Okay. So I was sitting in this meeting looking at the other mothers like myself with children at home, thinking this isn't what I joined the women's movement for. And I went away and I with a small group of women that I founded myself, and we were offered a little tiny house in 2 Belmont Terrace. It was tiny. It had 2 bedrooms, 2 rooms upstairs, 2 rooms downstairs, and an outside loo and a kitchen. And we opened the door, and the idea was that all women could come, bring their children. But the most important thing is that we could work with our children in our communities. Because my beef was that once you had children, you were completely anonymous. You were supposed to stay out of the way and not make a noise. So we got very involved in all the local issues that come up. And then the first woman, I always remember her name was Kathy. She walked in and she just took her blouse off, and she was black and blue from her neck down to her waist because he'd beaten her very carefully so no one would see the bruises. And that night, I took her in. I took her home because I couldn't leave her in the little house by herself. And from that moment onwards, women and children just poured in. It was really, can you imagine how frightening it was? Suddenly, all these desperate women, beaten and blue, and the children hit beaten. And that's when suddenly the whole discussion on domestic violence opened up. But my problem was, having fought my way through the women's movement, I was very worried because I knew that if ever I was offered any funding, they'd be coming looking. And it's exactly what happened. 1974, all of a sudden, the women's movement, it's called the Women's Liberation Movement in those days, decided that they would open refuges. And they hijacked the entire discussion, and we couldn't make our voices heard. And then it's, as you know, it's become what is now prevalent, which is all men and all women are victims of male violence, which is completely untrue. The figures for domestic violence, and if you think about it, where you get children born into violent families, both the boys and girls are going to be affected. It's ludicrous to think just boys would be affected. And all the academic figures have always proven that it's equal between the numbers of men and women. The only trouble is the pot of gold. And that's the one the feminists really use to fund themselves and their movement against men.
So you attempted, well, you did successfully you opened a men's shelter,
Yes, it
and
didn't last long
you
because
got
there was no funding.
serious, you got no funding, and you also got serious backlash.
Well, yes, I mean, obviously, because as far as the feminist movement's concerned, internationally, it's not just England. The men are the oppressors, men are the batterers, men are rapists just by virtue of an X chromosome.
So do you think that the mere recognition of male victims is something that feminists oppose because it makes it more
They
difficult to
have to
present the
oppose it
case?
because, as one of them said to me, she said, "We're not going to share the pot." If it was agreed that men were equally liable to be battered, then all of a sudden, I think it's something like 300 million a year in England would have to be shared with the men, with male refugees. It's not going to happen.
You actually were told we're not going to share the pot?
Yes, years ago.
Wow, that doesn't surprise me at all. So it doesn't sound like their motives. I mean, you've been saying the whole video, their motives are not pure. Their intent is not to help people, anyone. Their intent is pure greed, pure selfishness?
Well, it's interesting. It's also partly brainwashing, you see, because actually virtually all the refuges are run by feminists. And the tragedy of it all is boys over the age of 12 can't go into refuges.
Yeah,
And
I've heard.
this is yeah, and this is funded by government money, taxpayers' money.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard stories of women showing up with their 13-year-old son and then being turned down because
Yeah,
they didn't want to bring the boy in, and then they were forced to sleep outside.
yeah, yes,
Or
or stay in the violence.
or abandon the boy.
Yeah, put them in. Well, here in England, what they do is they would, if she agrees, she has to put her boy into care. In other words, the social services hand him over to the social services for her to be able to go into a refuge with her children.
And what are the
Shocking.
social services like in the UK? Because here
Oh,
there's a very bad reputation for foster care,
oh, it's terrible here. Absolutely terrible.
like
There's no such thing.
abuse, and
Yeah,
exploitation. Yeah, we get the same
yeah.
stories. There's a lot.
Yeah.
Do you recognize the name Mark Angelucci?
Yes,
Angelucci?
he got
Right, and
killed.
he did get killed,
Yeah.
and it was
No, he was
very
a
very
lovely.
strange.
We
I've
still
met
don't know
Mark.
what happened. We don't know what happened. I have too. We don't know what happened, do we?
So he was killed by a former member of the NCFM, the National Coalition for Men. But it was
Ah,
very strange. We don't know exactly what happens. And Mark was digging into stories of foster care abuse. So
okay.
maybe, I don't want to be a
Well,
conspiracy theorist, but it's strange. It
yeah,
is strange.
yeah.
So do you think it's possible for there to be a reconciliation between the men's movement and the feminist movement?
Well, I don't see how because of the feminist ideology. If you genuinely believe that all men are perpetrators, how can you think that you could ever live with something like that? Because it's apart from anything else, it's ludicrous, isn't it?
Do you think I think you're right. I think the feminist organizations I think are kind of beyond any kind of hope because like you say, I think that a lot of them are headed by complete sociopaths
Yeah, I
and
agree.
they
Well, it's
don't mean
about the
any
money. All you
right,
have to remember, it's about the money, and they're not sharing it.
right.
You don't have. There's nothing else really comes into it. That's the simple, bold fact.
But do you think it's possible to reach out and bridge the gap, maybe even change the minds of the people who you said the brainwashed, those who are genuine believers because they believe the misinformation and they believe the lies? Do you think those people can be reached?
Well, because they're so out of any kind of. I mean, to actually believe that it's only men who are violent means that there's something very wrong with you, because the evidence before your eyes proves that both men and women can be equally violent.
Right. So how do you see the future, let's say the 10-year future of, we'll stay in the UK just for this question. Um, the politics around domestic abuse, do you think things will get better or worse in the next 10 years for male victims?
They'll stay exactly the same because they won't be recognized.
Okay. Do you think you'll have the general public? See, I so hope you're wrong about that. And I've always tried to be the optimistic men's advocate. But as the years go on, I tell myself things get better. And then a story will come out or an article will come out and I'll browse through the comments. And sometimes I'm pleasantly surprised, but sometimes it's very depressing because it's exactly like you say, I can't believe people still have this ridiculous mindset. It's like they're trapped in the past. Do you think amongst the general public, more and more people are waking up to this
I
and
think among the
attitudes are
general
beginning?
public, but they've always been supportive. The general public are perfectly well aware of domestic violence being an issue that is a shared issue. And they're also aware that it's generational, and that it's a learned pattern of behaviors. I've always said from early childhood. And as a child, and I was a child, was both my parents, they weren't physically violent. My mother was to me, she beat me. But my father and mother, and they had no excuses because they were rich, they had houses and servants and chauffeurs and all the rest of it. But essentially, it was a war zone. It's their war. I was born into it through no fault of my own. So I did what every child does. Even in good, warm, loving families, children develop their own strategies for survival, is what I call it. And if you're born into a violent family, then your strategies of survival can be various. For instance, mine was to be violent and more violent than anybody else. So I wrote my first book was called Infernal Child, was about my violent childhood. Then the other alternative is what I call hibernation. You have a child who basically the only way they've learned to survive is to hibernate. So they'll get all the kind of diseases like migraines and itches and sores and scratches, and they really attack themselves. So you can either externalize your violence, which I did, or you can internalize your violence. And so that's your strategies for survival, but it doesn't make for a good, healthy human being. Or if you're coming out of those violent relationships as children, how do you learn to make good, loving, warm, non-violent relationships? Because you don't have the model unless you're very lucky.
And my video is back. I bought a very fancy new laptop and the settings are very complicated. So I had two programs running and that's why the video is kind of acting strange. But I gotta say, this is why I'm so happy that I'm getting to interview you now, because you just were awarded a CBE, Command of the British Empire. So the iron is hot. So you will get views. This video will get views. And everything you're saying now, I think is so crucial for people to hear. And it's completely true when you say it's generational. I
Yes.
just want to go. I just want to go back really quickly when you said that the public is aware. Back in the early 70s when you first started doing this, do you think even then the public was aware about the nature of male victims?
Yes, I do. I do. I mean, because we've all normal, women and men. You've all got friends and friends who, that she hits people or he hits people. I mean, it's not a big secret. The problem for me was that in 1971, which is absolutely unbelievable as far as I'm concerned, there was nothing. So when I opened the refuge, which I was expecting to be a little community center where we'd all meet each other and share things, and then suddenly finding that it was rammed full of terrified mothers and kids. And I started looking for literature, anything to do with domestic violence. There was absolutely nothing. There wasn't a single paper, academic study, nothing about domestic violence. So it'd been sitting there for thousands of years. It's always been with us, but it'd been a big, dirty secret. And so I had to really make it up as I went along, because the women were pouring in. And then of the first 100 women that came in, 62 were as violent or more violent than the men they left. And what refuges do now is they evict any woman who acts out violently, even though those are the women with their children that we most need to look after, most need to help.
Yeah, one of the most infuriating things that I hear, which I think is a pure lie. I don't think the people, I think some of the people who say this are the brainwashed, but definitely the architects of this argument are being dishonest. They say that, and you are proof that this is not true. They say that the reason why men's advocates talk about male victims, it's not because they want to help male victims. It's just because they're trying to dismiss women victims. We only bring this up because we're trying to hijack or derail the conversation about women, which is complete nonsense because
It is.
you started out your first activity was helping female victims. Your second activity was helping male victims.
Mm.
So, it's just it's an absurd argument that you can't talk about male victims without someone accusing you of trying to silence female victims.
And the other problem too is men, because one of the things that I did get a men's house. Immediately I got the women's house. Then secondly, I thought there has to be refuge for men. And I got from it was it was a council in a beautiful house in North London for men. And I opened the house, and the first few men came in, and they went into the various bedrooms, and they didn't come out. The only reason they'd come out, they wouldn't help each other. And I kept saying, well, where's the staff? And I said, you're the staff. It's just like the women's refuge. You come in and you take care of each other. You keep the door open and you take in other men and you help them. They wouldn't do it. And this has always been a problem, I found, that men won't help each other.
And men will turn on each other too. Men will blame each other. I mean,
Yeah.
some of the most toxic, most awful, frankly, people who speak against men's advocates and speak against male victims are men. And I always wonder, are these people being genuine, or are these people playing a role because they think there's going to be some kind of reward for them? So let me ask you, when you received harassment from feminists, when you opened the men's shelter, um, did you get harassment from men as well?
No,
And if so, what was it like?
I didn't get harassment from men, but I became very disillusioned because I recognized that as far as men were concerned, they were not going to take care of each other. Because why is there this huge international women's movement? There's no men's movement. And there desperately needs a men's movement because we in the last 50 years, a woman has only got to pick up a phone. She doesn't have to have any evidence. And she can actually just say, I'm living in a hostile climate. And he's out. He's lost. He can't go back to his own house. And if she really wants, called the silver bullet, she says, oh, yes, and he's molested the children, I think. And he'll never see his children again. And this is going on
Yeah.
all the time.
Well, in the US, we have the Duluth model, which
I know
was
that model. It's
completely
appalling. It's
destructive.
absolutely appalling.
And
It's been um, dismissed time and time again academically. The Duluth model.
including by one of the founders of the Duluth model actually
That's right.
spoke against it.
Yeah.
Um, but it's no surprise. I mean, do you see, and again, this is going back to the question, why are men's advocates so critical of feminism? Well, let me ask this question. Do you see any feminists today, other than the founder we just mentioned, criticizing the Duluth model? I don't.
No,
Do you
no,
see
but
any do you see any feminist organizations mention anything about how male victims are discriminated against?
why would
Ever.
they? But
Why
why
would
would
they?
they? Because it's the money. I keep saying this: follow the money, follow the huge salaries, follow the
See,
whole edifice. There's $1 billion edifice.
I think that's so interesting because you never really I've been involved in the men's rights movement for a while, so I've had conversations like this for a while, and I don't see people bring up follow the money very often, but I think you're absolutely right. I think if you look at
Yeah,
the funding of the government,
mm,
millions of dollars, millions of
yeah,
pounds, maybe even
yeah,
billions of dollars,
yeah.
billions of pounds. You know,
Yes,
some of that has to be in the form of salaries.
it
If you're
is.
in an
Most of
organization,
it. Most of it.
a lot of people don't understand what nonprofit means. Nonprofit, they think that it means everyone is a volunteer. That's not what
No.
nonprofit means. That is not what nonprofit means. People who work for nonprofits still make a salary. Nonprofit, as I'm sure you know, means the business does not collectively add revenue for itself. That's
That's
all
right.
it means. It means the business cannot invest its revenue into making more revenue for itself. The people working for that nonprofit can still get paid. So I think you're absolutely right. So
Mhm.
how do we tackle that?
You would have to shake the tree very hard so that all the people who make a fortune out of the misery and sadness of domestic violence are got rid of. It's the only way, because it's become a stunted, hideous organization which basically persecutes men and fathers.
So you were saying that in the early 70s, 1971, people recognized male victims. And you said that it's generational, and you've said that people recognize it then and they recognize it now, and yet you don't think anything's going to change in the next 10 years. So do you think anything's changed between 1971 and today? Or do you think is
Yeah,
it
I think a
from your
lot's
perspective?
changed. I think from my perspective, what's happened is certainly there aren't enough refugees anyway, but there's about 400 or 500 here in England, and it's as far as I'm concerned, it's gravy for the ladies. It's a whole. It's a bit like feminist studies in universities. There's a whole huge part of universities now that essentially uh, train young minds to think of men as the enemy, think of marriage, think that the most important thing that women need to realize is that men are not necessarily harmonious to family life, as Harriet Harman, our member of parliament, has said, and other members of parliament, Jess Phillips being one of them.
So from the perspective of male victims, do you think we've made any progress at all?
No, because there's no refuges for men.
See, that's very depressing for me, to think that I've been doing this. I'm 30 years old now. I've been doing this really since I was 16, and I like to tell myself that there's been some progress, if not in the law, at least in people's minds, at least in the public awareness. But to hear that this has been going on 50 years and it's just the same story, I mean, it really makes you wonder. Are you aware? Are you familiar with the "Women Are Wonderful" effect?
What's
So it
that?
was it was a study back in the 70s from the US where they tested a group of men and a group of women, and they found that both men and women are predisposed to be more sympathetic to women and to be more predisposed to believe a woman over a man. And what the study essentially did was present identical scenarios and then compare how people reacted when a woman was involved in a scenario or a man was involved in a scenario. And they found that both men and women were more likely to support women and believe women, even when the scenarios and the situations and the facts were exactly the same. And the question is this a function of evolutionary psychology? Or is this a function of socialization? Or is this a mixture of both? If so,
Probably a mixture of both. But I would say, from my point of view, when I was growing up, and I'm now 84, men were looked up to and respected. The father was the head of the family. There was no argument about that. On the whole, women were home looking after children, and men went out, and men were the wage slaves. We had choices as women. It's a very different time. And the father was accepted. He was the head of the household, and the woman was her head in the household. This anti-father, anti-family was really more to do with the politics of the time. With and as I said, in 1969, when I went to that very first meeting and walked up the stairs, and there were all the Mao posters. It was a very big time when essentially, in those days, the idea of the family and the most important thing as far as the left wing politics, and it was extremely left wing in the late 60s, was that the family was a hostile place, and that women, the new family would be women and children, no men, no fathers. And
and
that's
when
been
you
going on now for a long time.
oh, for a very long time. And to be intersectional, as feminists like to say, a lot of men and women from the Black community in the United States say one of the biggest problems in the Black community is the lack of fatherhood. and the lack of fathers. And it's often framed as, well, fathers are deadbeat, or fathers abandoned their families, or
That
fathers
wasn't
aren't there
true,
for the
true
kids.
at all.
It's not true
No,
at all.
what happened was so difficult. So I remember all this in '69. One of the most dangerous things for if a woman and a man were living together and they had children, and he lost a job or couldn't get a job, he had to leave the house, because if he was there, she couldn't get her benefits.
Right.
And so
Right.
what our local social security used to do was to go in the middle of the night, bang their way in to women and children's to the family, and check to see that there's only one toothbrush. He wasn't under the bed or hiding in the cupboard.
They went into the house
Oh yeah, yeah, and banged on the doors and went in. Yes, they
in the
did.
middle of in the middle of the night.
In the middle of the night. Yeah, it didn't matter how scared the kids were. It didn't matter.
See, that has to be, when you look at something like that, there's absolutely no way that that's being done in good faith.
No, it's not.
There's no way that's being done in good faith. Because in America, it was exactly the same scenario about the
Yeah, it is.
benefits of the father
Yeah.
being in the house. But I've never heard of, in the States, them banging on the door at 2 in
But
the
they
morning.
did. Oh, they did. But then you wouldn't hear that, because the people that they do it to don't have a voice, do they?
Right, 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 exactly. Man, wow. Geez. The more you really kind of put this all together, and the more you think about the collective and the totality of it all, it's almost frightening, because it makes you
It was
wonder, like, what's
anti-family. You
next?
have to remember, it was anti-family.
Why? I mean, what was the motive for these people?
I think it comes down to, if you want to run an efficient totalitarian state, then what you have to do is to get rid of the men.
Right.
I
Wow.
honestly, people have asked me about this, and I've just said it's easy. It's easy to control women and children. Put them on benefits, then you can manipulate the benefits. So if they don't do what they're told, they'll end up losing money, and all those kind of things. But in order to do that, you have to have essentially, you have to get rid of men, take men out of the family. And
Yeah,
just remember, Harriet Harman, MP, said that the new family would be women and children.
she's a big, wasn't wasn't she linked to wasn't she
Yeah,
accused of being violent to her own partner? There was a
I don't know that one, but I know she was accused of being involved with one of the pedophile organizations.
Oh, I haven't heard that one.
Yeah,
No, I heard Harriet Harman. I don't want to. I don't want. Let me jump
yeah.
on
I
Google.
think I haven't heard that. If I had, believe me, I'd have told you.
Right, but I know there was a prominent MP who was, I think it was Harriet Harman, who was accused. There was a story about how she, oh yes, I see Harriet Harman and the pedophile. That's right. I know there was an MP who was violent towards her husband, and it was kind of covered up. I do want to say, I do think I remember it was Harriet Harman. I don't want to make that accusation because I don't know for sure, but I am pretty
No,
sure I remember reading something along those lines. Certainly wouldn't surprise me. But, at least we have people like Phil Davies. At least we have someone fighting back. I mean, at least we have people like you. And, in terms of signs of progress, I think the fact that you got a CBE, I think is in a way a huge sign of progress.
yeah,
So I think
it
maybe things
is.
are changing.
I think, yeah, exactly that. And I'm looking forward, hopefully, when I go to get my honor pinned to my front, that it will be Camilla who will be doing it, and it'll give me a chance, because I know that she's concerned about domestic violence. And
That would be incredible.
yeah, well, because for 50 years is a long time to try and to get these changes that needed to be made, and to take the whole to bring the whole thing back to generational family violence. It's a learned pattern of behavior, and it's not difficult, because I dealt obviously with a high percentage of very violent women, and it was of just being able to say to a woman, listen, you've got nothing to be ashamed of. You grew up, you were born into a violent family. You've learned, when you are upset or unhappy, you go straight to rage. You go from pain straight to rage. All I need to do is to show you another way of behaving. And you can trust me enough to say, I'm hurting. If you're in a violent family, and I was, then what you don't do as a child is to admit to any feelings. It doesn't matter whether you're hit or whatever happens, you don't cry. Then you have to relearn that it's all right. You don't have to continually defend yourself. And that's what I taught women in the refuge. They learned, and men always worked in the refuge. Now, no men can work in refuges, but always half-assed staff for men. How do children and women know good, gentle men if they don't have them as models?
Yeah. I mean, this has been incredible, I have to say. And it's interesting that you say that they used to have half the staff were males, and now men
Yeah,
aren't even allowed to be staff at all, really kind of
no,
says it all.
they can't even sit on the board, but you have to remember the money.
Right.
That's what it all comes down to. And if we get a change, and it is said that men must work in refuges, they are an important part of the work of a refuge, then we would see proper refuges.
Well, this has been absolutely incredible. My Zoom is telling me we have a minute and 30 seconds left,
Okay.
and about the right time, because once you get past 40 minutes, people begin to lose interest. I
Yeah.
find I always try and keep it under 40 minutes anyway, because I've done hour and a half interviews before, and YouTube shows me the retention stats, and after 40 minutes, people they stop
Yeah.
watching. But this was incredible. I mean, I've learned things today
Good.
from this conversation. This is I can't even begin to tell you the honor. I mean, I've talked about you for years. I've cited you for years. I've talked about you for years, and now to actually have you on my channel doing this interview is unbelievable for me. I mean, you're Erin Pizzey. I've talked about Erin Pizzey for years. I've linked you to people in debates and conversations, and to actually have you here is incredible. I'm sure this won't be the last time. I want to speak to you when you get your CBE because that will
Okay.
be really, really cool. Do you get like a physical trophy or a medal or physical banner?
Yes, you get a medal. You get a
Oh,
medal.
I want you to hold that up to the camera. I want you to
Okay.
hold it up on the camera. So, we're going to get disconnected in a little bit here, but that's okay because this was incredible. So everyone, this is Faces of the MRM. This is Erin Pizzey. I'm Blue Orange 22, and thanks for watching. Erin, this was incredible. Thank you so much. I'm so honored to have you on.
And so